a growing number of stories about teens, unfortunately, who are enticed and are led away, have their means of identification taken away, their cell phone taken away, and they're thrust into sexual slavery against their will. They thought they had a boyfriend, perhaps, that was going to show them a nice time in Las Vegas for a long weekend or something, but it's something entirely different.
Welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Pleasure to have you here today. George Kirkendall has been a real leader in our community for many, many years. And he was directing an organization here called Citizens for Community Values. And that ministry, a lot of folks don't know about the work that this organization does. And we're going to talk more about the group. And we're also going to introduce you to the new director, Russ White, who is the executive director for Citizens for Community Values.
Good morning.
Russ, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me come. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, you come on high recommendation of my good friend Carol Wiley, who is the director of A Way Out. And A Way Out now, of course, is under the leadership, under the umbrella ministry structure of Citizen for Community Values. And so she called me up. She said, I'm so excited to report we have a new executive director, and we want to introduce him to our Mid-South area. So that's why you're here today.
Thank you, and I thank Carol for making the suggestion.
Now, you told me that radio is something you've had in your past. You did something down in Florida.
Well, I had the opportunity, Byron, to be interviewed a couple of times in radio and as well on TV. When I was a young lawyer practicing in West Palm Beach, I headed up the Public Relations Committee of the Palm Beach County Bar Association, and we did a piece on that reached out to the public on the dangers of alcohol and driving, a DWI awareness program.
Right.
And then in Fort Lauderdale, I had the opportunity to appear on Christian radio connected with Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, talking about a myriad of subjects, legal topics in the main. One of my partners in my law firm of 30 years was a regular host of a radio show that came on every Wednesday night, and he was the host of that for about 25 years. And from time to time, he'd have one of his partners come on and either co-host or sub for him, so I had that opportunity.
Well, you know, I've got a possibility you might have to host for me sometime, you know, since you've got that background. But I'm so glad to have you here. And now, West Palm Beach, I have some friends that I envy who live at West Palm Beach now, and they post their pictures of doing paddle boarding and kayaking and going, you know, out on the water, because I love water sports. And so I'm very envious of them. So why would you leave a beautiful destination like West Palm Beach to come to Memphis, Tennessee?
Well, good question. I've been asked that by many Memphians that I've had the privilege of meeting in my 26 months here in Memphis. I actually was in West Palm for 3 years, met my wife, we moved to Fort Lauderdale, and were there about 32 years. We even worked in the same law firm. Our son and his wife moved from Fort Lauderdale to Washington, D.C. to Memphis. Our son started to have the first of his now 4 daughters, our 4 grandchildren. And he started to prevail upon the soft touch, which was his mother, my wife, about, Mom, why don't you and Dad move to Memphis and help us to raise these youngsters? So my wife, visiting frequently as she did, I didn't have the time so much as she did, but we both like Memphis. And Byron, I had to make the hardest decision of my professional life to leave my law practice of 35 years behind. That was not an easy choice, but I had looked into and became licensed to practice law in Tennessee, found a job with a Memphis law firm. So when I told my partners in Fort Lauderdale that I was going to make the move, they questioned my sanity, but they were happy to receive my book of business, and they left the door open for me. But we're happy. We are so happy to be here in Memphis. We are blessed. We found a church. We're 6 doors down from my son and our 4 granddaughters now, and we're absolutely blessed becoming involved in the community. And I believe the Lord ordained my arrival at CCV, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity to have joined this organization.
We know, Russ, there's only one calling in life that trumps every other calling, no matter how long you've been in a law practice or how long you've been in broadcasting, it just overrides it all. And that's the calling to be a grandparent. There's nothing like it, you know?
A friend of mine, as we were walking out of a men's Bible study in Memphis almost 2 years ago, well, a year and a half or so ago, said, "What brought you to Memphis?" It's before we'd really had a chance to talk. And he said, "Before you answer that question, I bet I can answer it. FedEx or grandchildren?" And yes, he was right, grandchildren. I'll add that my wife was very gracious to me. Before she put on what I'll call, to borrow a basketball paradigm, we're coming into March Madness here, a full court press to move to Memphis. She let me finish up my 5th and last year of seminary. I had the calling at age 57 to start attending, and I went for 5 years and got a master's in Christian and classical studies. And she let me finish that and get my degree because that was the desire of my heart, to enable my teaching in Sunday school and Wednesday night Bible classes in our church. So within a week, though, of my obtaining the degree and our enjoyment of that, she came on pretty strong. I'll put it that way. It was a full court press in every conceivable way. But we both prayed about it, and when the Lord opened the employment door, we both jumped at the opportunity. But I had remembered that still small knocking on the door of my heart while I was studying in seminary. And part of my prayer was, "Lord, if you want to transition me out of private law practice, which is the thing that I knew how to do and how I could raise my family, just make it very clear to me, because otherwise I might have blinders on and not see. So, but for your leading me, I might not recognize an opportunity." But I was influenced by the book Halftime. And Lord, if you want to show me how to be involved in your kingdom's work for the next part of my life, here I am, use me, send me. That was my prayer in seminary. And so when I came to Memphis, I was still recalling that. I had a job with a local law firm, Harris, Shelton, Hanover, Walsh, of counsel with the firm, and I got a call from a gentleman at my church with whom I talked about the possibility of transitioning into Christian vocational work. And he said, "You're probably not looking for a job." I said, "I'm not." "You're probably happy where you are." "I am." And he said, "Well, let me tell you about this opportunity. There's this gentleman, George Kirkendall, who's been executive director for 16 years at Citizens for Community Values, and he's looking to retire, and he's actively seeking men to apply for his position." So I called George. We met and had the opportunity to learn about CCV and all that it's accomplished in the greater Memphis area. And at the end of the meeting, he encouraged me to put in a resume.
What was it, Russ, about CCV that, caused your curiosity to arise, that, created an interest in your own life to maybe pursue something with this organization?
Well, one of the immediate things that jumped out at me was the CCV emphasis on bringing awareness to the public about the dangers of sexually oriented businesses, pornography, and human trafficking. And while I served as an attorney with my law firm of 30 years in Fort Lauderdale, I had the opportunity also, I believe God was providential. He brought me the opportunity to represent a city in Florida as its city attorney, the city of Oakland Park. And during my 4-year tenure as city council, I was asked by the predominance of the city commission, which were Christian, to author and bring to them for their consideration adult entertainment ordinance that would bring a measure of constitutional restrictions and regulations on the strip clubs in that city. It took me about 6 months to complete the research and came up with a 40-plus page ordinance. However, it was not adopted, in my view, unfortunately. I believe it would have been withstood constitutional muster. One of the city commissioners, who was a Christian, changed her mind in the face of threats by the First Amendment lawyers representing the strip clubs that he was going to sue the city and it was going to cost the city a lot of money to defend the litigation. She changed her mind on the grounds that I don't want our city to incur a lot of legal expense having to defend such a suit. So it was a 3-2 vote, although I had been asked to prepare an ordinance in 3-2 in favor of going forward with it. When I presented it, she changed her mind. It was a 3-2 vote not to adopt it. I think it was the wrong move by that commissioner. Unfortunately, that city did not adopt an ordinance. Shelby County, in contrast, has adopted an ordinance which has withstood 5 years of litigation in the federal court system, and the attorneys for the strip clubs clubs attempted to take the challenge of the Shelby County ordinance to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in January of 2014 denied the request to be taken up, thereby upholding the decision of the Federal Sixth Circuit Court of Appeal in Cincinnati, in which Tennessee sits in that district. So, in other words, the law was upheld as constitutional, and it allowed the county to require that for these strip clubs, if they want to keep their liquor license, because that's how they make their legal money, they'll have to put at least a modicum of clothing on their performers, i.e. probably a bikini. They'll have to refrain from dancing in the laps or on the tabletops of the patrons, and there should be no touching. So, as I understand it, of the 13 strip clubs in Memphis, and Memphis had a notorious reputation, including stories about live sex acts on stage, an absolutely notorious reputation that it exceeded just the boundaries of Shelby County. People in South Florida had heard about the strip clubs in Memphis, Tennessee. So the opportunity to be with an organization that successfully brought a measure of restriction immediately gathered my interest. And then when I heard about the A Way Out ministry and the ministry efforts to help transition women who wish to come out of sexually oriented businesses for goodness sake, for their betterment's sake, and for Christ's sake, because it is a Christian ministry to focus to the ministry.
Russ, that same statement gets repeated many, many times when folks feel like their rights are being trampled on. You can't legislate morality. And yet we drive down Poplar Avenue and streets all over with, speeding signs that say speed limits 35, 45, highway 70, whatever, we do legislate morality every day.
Exactly.
That what they want to do indecently, without trying to, without any reservations for that right. I mean, and the potential impact it has on a community. Let's just talk about that for a second.
Yes. Well, those involved in sexually oriented businesses who run those businesses, those sorts of businesses, the academic studies, the government studies all show attract forms of crime, including prostitution, including drug usage. As I understand it from speaking with undercover police in Memphis, it also attracts a greater presence of guns in these clubs now. Not to mention the prostitution that may arise, as I'm told by the police. Prostitution is arranged for and goes on, out of these facilities. That spreads STDs in the community. So it's a public health concern. As well, the academic studies show that property values for properties around sexually oriented businesses drop. They lose value. So there's a whole host of reasons why we, as a citizenry, even if we don't hold to a Christian worldview, ought to be concerned about the presence of sexually oriented businesses in our community.
Yeah. One of the things I really appreciate, you just mentioned about your organization, Citizens for Community Values, is the fact that there's this A Way Out program. I've had Carol Wiley, who I mentioned earlier, as the director of this portion of your organization. She has brought young women into our studio here where you are sitting right now who have shared their sad, brokenhearted stories of how they were basically trapped in this lifestyle, the drugs. And I mean, they were trying to support, their children. Many of them obviously are single moms, oftentimes. And it's just a very entangled lifestyle that these individuals get, caught up in. And some of them don't know there is an opportunity to get out, or how do you get out of this lifestyle? And you, through A Way Out, provide that opportunity. That's
correct, Byron. The A Way Out ministry has been part of Citizens for Community Value since its inception. The organization was started by Carolyn McKenzie in 1992, and we became chartered as a nonprofit in 2 years later. Through the 24 years of the ministry's outreach, the statistics, as I understand them, are that we have enabled in excess of 500 women to transition out of sexually oriented lifestyles and work.
And my understanding, too, Russ, is the fact that West Tennessee, where we are right now, has some of the highest concentrated prosecuted cases of human trafficking in the entire United States.
That's correct. In my Sunday school class in church is a local criminal court, circuit court judge, and he advises me that Memphis is in a traffic pattern of bringing sexually trafficked, oftentimes minors, children, in groups when their sexual purveyors or pimps feel the heat coming in Kansas City or in St. Louis, they'll transition them to Memphis. And then if they feel the heat coming from the local authorities, they'll transition them to Jackson, Mississippi, over to Nashville, or down in New Orleans, is what I'm advised by that judge. And this is a phenomenon that is growing. Perhaps our media doesn't give as much attention to it as what is really occurring. Recent statistics that I've seen suggest that the average profile of a girl is between 12 and 14, and of a boy is 11 to 13 years of age, who are targeted for the possibility of being enslaved or enticed into and then enslaved in human trafficking for sexual commercial purposes.
I mean, many of these young individuals you're talking about are brought into a what they call a family.
Yes,
isn't that right?
That's correct. And there are more than just a couple of incidental, situations that have occurred. I've read a book just authored last year about human trafficking in America and what to do about it. And it suggests that there are approximately 155,000 youth, minors in America that are trafficked. This is just not a phenomenon happening in Eastern Europe, as manifested by the a recent set of movies with Liam Neeson, I believe is his name. But this is a phenomenon that occurs on Facebook, over social media, as teenagers, for example, are disenthralled, not happy for some reason with their parents. So they're they put out a message that, I'm not getting along with mom and dad. Well, those who are inclined to look for victims, people that they can entice into their system, look on the social media sites so that they might make a connection and eventually then have a meeting and then eventually take them to the mall and buy them stuff and eventually start making intimations like, who loves you? Your mom and dad don't love you. I love you. Let me take you on a vacation. Let me take you to Las Vegas. And there have been more than just anecdotal stories. There are a growing number of stories about teens, unfortunately, who are enticed and are led away, have their means of identification taken away, their cell phone taken away, and they're thrust into sexual slavery against their will. They thought they had a boyfriend, perhaps, that was going to show them a nice time in Las Vegas for a long weekend or something, but it's something entirely different. And we as a community need to be aware of the growing dynamic of human trafficking. And that's one of the things that when I was interviewed by the board of directors for CCV, that's one of the things I made emphasis that I want to bring a heightened awareness of the dynamic of human trafficking, especially in minors. This book that I made mention of indicated that 2 men who gather between 8 and 10 sexual slaves for over a year's time, after expenses, after motel room costs, after food, after an occasional doctor visit to treat STDs, they stand to make $500,000 a year, the 2 of them, after expenses for their 8 or 10. And as they feel the heat, they'll move it to a different locale. But it's quite if you're not of a Christian worldview, if you're not morally inclined, if you don't see the evil of human trafficking, you might walk away thinking, hey, I can make a pretty good living from doing this.
I've seen suspicious individuals out in local establishments when I go out shopping sometimes, and you can see the emptiness in the eyes of these young people, and you'll see like a big, kind of a brawny guy sometimes, very close by, watching them. Maybe they're going out to to get something to eat, or going to, like I say, a Target store or something, to purchase. But it just, as a citizen, I say, I wonder, is there anything I can do? I mean, I know it's not safe to try to approach a situation like that, but but it's so suspicious looking, Russ?
Yes. And there are things that we can do, Byron. For instance, I am hopeful of having the opportunity to get before the Hotel Motel Association in the greater county area and to talk about how they can be eyes and ears in the community to report when they see a group of young children who ought to be in school during school hours instead confined in a motel room where somebody's paying the freight for them, and then cars coming in at all hours of the night, multiple men coming to that motel room.
And this is happening here in our city.
It's happening all over. It's just not in Eastern Europe anymore. It's happening in Memphis, Tennessee.
Now, Russ, when you were looking about coming on board here as executive director, did you compare what's happening with Citizens for Community Values with other type of similar organizations in cities, maybe in West Palm or other places? Have you been able to compare what they do here with other organizations?
To my knowledge, Byron, there's not a similar organization in South Florida. There is a similar organization in the city of Cincinnati, for example. The state of Ohio has Citizens for Community Values of Ohio. I'm told that there are CCVs in other select cities, probably in red states is the truth of the matter. Blue states may not be inclined, blue cities and blue states may not be inclined to have somebody with a focus like they may not support such an organization. Memphis has provided a great measure of support for our ministry, and I'm so thankful to the citizens and the churches and the businesses in Memphis that have supported our ministry through these 24 years.
Russ, really what you're saying here, it's really imperative that the Church of Jesus Christ, first of all, be informed and engage and look for opportunities not only to support an organization like CCV, but to maybe it might mean getting dirty a little bit. I mean, opening an extra bedroom in their home to provide a place of solace for one of these young ladies trying to get out of the industry.
Yes, and also in terms of what we can do, another focus that I'd like to take is on the transportation industry. There is an organization called Truckers Against Trafficking. That's a Christian organization, and they are eyes and ears around the country for human trafficking, and they can call the national hotline a number for human trafficking, or call local authorities. And we are hearing reported instances of that happening. People in the mall, when they go and see something like what you described, Byron, that's seen in the mall, right? I mean, there could be somebody like that at Wolf Chase Mall.
Well, I understand that is one of the big hot spots in our area, the Wolf Chase Mall. And this is something we need to tell our parents right now, Russ. We've got parents listening to us right now that they're teenage kids saying, "Hey, Mom, Dad, it's Friday night, Saturday night. Me and Susie or Joe, we're going to drop off at the mall, shop around. You can pick us up." Don't do that. Do not do that, because that's where it begins. And I can tell you from a personal experience, I have a family member right now, Russ, that I can take you to her grave. She was working at the mall. She was trafficked. And the brothel that she was working in down on South 3rd, the madam of the house, she got sick, didn't care about it, took her and dumped her body at a fire station. 3 weeks later, she died. And I'm passionate about this. I care about it. And so don't make the mistake as a parent and drop your child off at the mall and expect they're going to just have a good time. You need to be concerned. You need to be involved. You need to protect your child.
Excellent point, Byron. I'm so sorry to hear about your relative that way. But there are many instances of that. The local authorities have a program called Lives Worth Saving, in which they have women who are involved in prostitution. They've been arrested for it. They come to a local church and talk about the dangers of what they do, not only in terms of to their health, but what can happen to them in terms of their safety. And they've shown some some photographs of what has happened to numerous women in this community who have been murdered, their bodies dumped.
What's the process?
Very sad.
Oh, it's so
Very
sad.
tragic.
So tragic. Russ, what is the process of CCV, A Way Out, as they look for opportunities to engage these women? I mean, how do you make an initial contact? I mean, for the most part, these women aren't looking, I don't think, to step out. Maybe some of them want out, but don't know how to get out. They don't know of an organization like CCV. How do you connect with these women?
The Lives Worth Saving format that I was mentioning, to that event come not only the prostitutes and the prosecuting attorneys to talk about the dangers of prostitution, but as well Christian-based resource and ministry groups such as ours to inform these ladies of what is available to them as a way out.
Now, can the court actually recommend your organization for these women?
That's one of the points, Byron, that I'd like to take with our local judiciary to talk about ministries like ours and others with a similar focus in the community to serve as a diversionary group for women who would otherwise be in prison for prostitution or drug dealing, whatever it may be, but to be diverted into programs that can start to turn these women's lives around. Let me also mention I had the privilege of meeting with District Attorney General Amy Wyrick as a part of being the new kid on the block and meeting folks that we're connected with. And she indicated that one of the real challenges that we have in the community is providing enough residential housing for those who wish to emerge out of the criminal lifestyle, prostitution, drug dealing, or drug usage that they're involved in. There's not enough housing. Our ministry provides a safe house, but it's only large enough for 6 women, and we're unable to house children. We're interested in developing the resources to bring a larger facility to house more women, including their children. District Attorney General Wyrick says that is a need that our community has, but that would take the collective willpower and finances of the community to help make more of that type of residential living available.
I mean, something that is very doable if the churches in our community could join together to create a home like that.
Yes.
You've come at a very needed time, and again, George Kirkendall, I love that man. He just laid a wonderful foundation. The heartbeat, George is a great guy. And a lot of folks didn't get a chance to really know all of what he did. And so you're standing on the shoulders of some well-established ministry foundation that was laid. And your expertise, I know Carol was so excited to welcoming you from your previous law experience and things. Have you mentioned about the ordinance in West Palm Beach that you were working on?
Fort Lauderdale.
In Fort Lauderdale, rather. Have you what type of law were you primarily working with when you were there? Did you do many cases like that, or try to create support like that?
Well, I was in Fort Lauderdale with my law firm. It was the city of Oakland Park, right next to a sister community of Fort Lauderdale, the city of Oakland Park, for which I drafted the adult entertainment ordinance. I had the opportunity to serve as municipal counsel for several years with that city. I was not a municipal counsel to other jurisdictions, so my opportunity to draft a set of restrictions that were constitutional were limited to that one city.
Yeah.
But it did provide me with an opportunity to do a lot of legal research and to learn what the courts find to be acceptable as to the measure of restrictions and regulations that can be brought, even just from a safety and the welfare of the citizenry standpoint, that can be brought on these businesses. And what we are hearing through some of the county attorneys, assistant county attorneys that prosecuted the litigation for Shelby County, and they were successful through the federal court system,
Yes.
over 5 years of litigation.
Right.
What we're hearing from them and from the undercover police with whom we've been put in touch is that the clubs have gotten slicker. And one of the ways in which they've done that is to create VIP rooms. And to gain entree to a VIP room, you might, come to a club. I haven't been into any of the clubs. I don't intend to go in. I'll drive by and, see what the outside looks like. But you pay your cover charge, $10, whatever it may be, $20, buys you a couple drinks. You'll come in, you'll watch a dancer, probably in a bikini, dance around a pole. You listen to the music and whatnot. But if you want to gain entree to the VIP room, you have to be escorted back. You have to pay a higher amount of consideration. You may have to be frisked for guns, and before you're allowed entree into those. What I'm told, and again, I don't have firsthand knowledge, but what I'm told by the officials that I've dialogued with is that it is out of these VIP rooms that the violations of the ordinance are occurring, and they are looking for opportunities to prosecute that.
And that's why they're getting slicker, like you said. Well, I tell you, our time is slipping away quickly. I want to ask you one final question on this program. You're going to have to come back. I can just see many more programs coming in the future as we share about the work of CCV in our community. But Russ, not as a lawyer, but as a grandpa, as a father, share your heart for a moment about this issue and why our listeners, need to be praying and why we need to be involved.
Well, I have 4 granddaughters, Byron, and they're 5 and under. And I've talked with so many men and women in the community who have granddaughters. And they are very concerned because the access to pornography that's on the internet, that's accessible by cell phone now, that can, pornography is not a victimless crime. There are plenty of academic and government studies that show that to be the case. The people that engage in corralling and enslaving for sexual commercial purposes children have all been shown to be major users of pornography. So we need to continue to spread the word and talk about the dangers of pornography, the need for parents and grandparents, members of churches, to be aware and concerned about and pray for our youth, because the temptation is amazingly strong for children to go there. And it's not just boys. Increasingly, studies show that girls, women, are going to and becoming addicts of pornography on the internet.
Yeah, and I think that's a good word. As you talk about these children, many of them, are wanting mom and dad to give them these smartphones, and parents need to make sure they're using the proper apps and things where they can control what type of sites their child can go to on those phones, and maybe decide they don't need a phone right now, if they're not responsible enough to know how to use it. But even if you're responsible, you can get caught up very easily, as you mentioned, through, text messaging or different avenues on the social media that can really draw you into that trap. Russ, you're going to have to come back. I hope you can.
Thank you, Byron. I'd just like to also say in praise of George Kirkendall, a local judge said that George was the private citizen most responsible for the adoption of the ordinance that came to Shelby County to regulate the strip clubs. And I thank George for everything he's done. He's laid down a large footprint, and prayerfully the Lord will continue to use our ministry for his kingdom's sake and for the restoration of women who seek to emerge out of the sex industry.
Well, George Kirkendall is one of my heroes. I'm looking forward again to having you back on the show here, Russ, and we'll talk more about what CCV is up to in our community. Friends, our guest today, Russ White, with Executive Director of Citizens for Community Values. If you'd like more information, please go to the website, ccvmemphis.org, ccvmemphis.org, and learn more about this work. Support them, pray for them. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Byron Tyler. It's all the time we have. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.